Joining me in the studio is Stuart Ayres, the New South Wales Minister for Western Sydney. Thanks for joining us again, Stuart.
Good to be here, Chris.
Look, you've been out and loud about the Warragamba Dam wall, and you want that dam wall raised, obviously to protect Western Sydney, a key area for you. Your seat is around Penrith. Why hasn't more been done to get this project underway?
Well, we've taken the project through its planning process. We've been really upfront with the community about the length of time it will take. We've undertaken the environmental impact statement. We've done everything the law has asked of us. We think we'll be in a position by the end of the year to have a planning determination for the dam wall, and then it'll be up to the federal government to give it the tick of approval from an environmental perspective. So I've been committed to this for a very long time. This is about protecting people's lives and property. What
about the federal environmental approval then? Will that mean another EIS? You've done an EIS, haven't you?
We've completed the EIS. One of the reasons why we've made it what I think is the most extensive environmental impact statement, I think, in the state's history, is because we are going to have to seek that federal government approval to make sure they understand the environmental impact. So I don't want any question marks over that. We've taken lots of time. We've had over 3,000 submissions. We're going through our response to all of those submissions now. So we're dotting every I, crossing every T, because I want to make sure when we get to that final hurdle and we ask the federal government to approve it from an environmental perspective, they understand they can do that and put people's lives and property first.
Well, Bob Carr's government first knocked this back in 1995. That's how long we've been looking at this project. He, on Sky News today, said, well, there's been 8 or 9 premiers since him and it still hasn't been done, basically wiping his hands of it. But it's been very clear, as you point out, that it's needed for flood mitigation. Why haven't we been able to see work start before now? Your own government's been in power for so many years.
Yeah, no, that's right, Chris. So when we started to see flood activity about 4 or 5 years ago start to re-emerge in the Hawkesbury and Nepean, I definitely picked up the mantle, said we need to do this project. It was a project that was put forward back in the early 90s. We've really gone basically 30 years where we've been dominated by low rainfall and droughts. So the natural disaster we've become quite familiar with is bushfires. But if we're transitioning into a pretty traditional weather cycle...
But we know that's our cycle. We know we go droughts and we go floods.
That's exactly right.
You can see it in all the weather charts. You can speak to all the experts. So we have to prepare for flood.
It's almost like clockwork, Chris, over the last 200 years. Every 35 or 40 years we cycle from drought into rains. We get floods as our natural disaster. That's why we started about 3 years ago doing what is a pretty complicated project. We've taken it to the point where it's now ready for approval. We'd like the federal government to fund it with us, but we do need the federal government to give it the tick of approval from an environmental perspective.
When you look at the money it costs in helping people rebuild their lives, getting them through this crisis, obviously in the long term it's going to save money. Now you're talking about getting those federal processes approval next year. Hopefully that could be quick. How quickly, best case scenario, could you begin construction?
Look, I think we can be on the ground doing early works next year. It's a complicated project. We've effectively got to build a wall in front of the existing Warragamba Dam wall. It's the Sydney drinking water supply, so we don't want to take any risks with that construction. So it's probably 3.5 to 4 year build to make sure that we've got that flood mitigation capacity to really support the Hawkesbury and Nepean. Really, this is a choice. You can hold the flood water behind a higher dam wall, or you can let it into people's living rooms.
Well, and just the simple way of thinking about that now is the Warragamba Dam has been pretty much full for the last year. But you can't just let all that water out and bring it down lower so you've got some capacity to mitigate floods, because that's for drinking water. You need that to get through the next drought.
That's correct. If we entered the last drought with our dam at 40%, we would have run out of water. So that's not really a solution. Chris, I can make it even simpler for you. Had we had a 14-metre high flood mitigation wall this week, we would not have spilled Warragamba Dam once.
All that extra rainfall would have just been held before.
We would have held that water back behind the dam. Yes, we would have seen flooding in some of those lower lying areas, but this is about protecting our community in most floods. And ultimately, you've got to make a choice. Do you hold the water behind the dam, or do you let it flush through people's communities?
Well, it's just a no-brainer. I'm glad you've been so forward on it yourself, but it's an indictment of the government, state and federal, that we've been talking about this for more than 30 years and we haven't actually dug a hole in the ground yet. So let's hope next year is the big year. Just before I let you go, I want to ask you about pandemic management. Now, I've been very complimentary of your government. The New South Wales Liberal government has been more open-minded, freer with the way it's dealt with the pandemic than most governments, yet you still have emergency powers in place in New South Wales. Isn't it time to get rid of those emergency powers so people can understand that life is back to normal, or as normal as it's going to be with COVID around?
Chris, there are powers that are in place, but they're very limited. And in New South Wales, which is vastly different to, say, the emergency powers that exist in Victoria, those powers are really in place to allow our health minister to put in public health orders in place. Now, we've got very few public health orders in place. People are largely functioning across the community, living with COVID. They've got their vaccinations. If you haven't had your third dose, go and get it.
But businesses and people know that you've got the power there to lock them down at a moment's notice. Wouldn't it be a very, very good signal to the community to get rid of those emergency powers?
No, I think that's a worthy point, Chris. We just want to make sure we get through the tail end of this thing, we look after the community and we make sure everyone does the right thing, keep living with COVID. I've seen people out and about. I saw thousands and thousands of people enjoying Vivid. They've all got the confidence to go out and live life, and that's exactly what we want them to do. We just want them to take the appropriate precautions. It's their life. They should make that choice.
Thanks for joining us, Stuart. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Stuart Ayres there, who's the Minister, the New South Wales Minister for Western Sydney. As I say, he's been pushing hard to get this dam wall increased, maybe finally next year. The ground will be broken after 30 years of debate about this. Imagine the pain it could have saved if that wall had been raised 15, 20 years ago.